my dad broke into my apartment and shouted, "Either you give me the money or I'll take it by force." I calmly asked, "Do you really want to do this?" He scoffed, but when he turned around, he saw. I never thought I'd see the day when I'd have to stand between my father and the last shred of dignity I had left. But then again, I never thought my own father would break into my home and threaten to rob me, either. That night started like any other. It was a cold Thursday in Chicago, the kind of bone-chilling cold that made you grateful for the four walls around you. I had just come home from another exhausting shift at St. Luke's Medical Center, where I worked as a respiratory therapist. Nothing glamorous, but it was a stable job, one that gave me purpose. My patients depended on me, and I liked knowing I made a difference, even if it was in small ways. The moment I stepped into my one-bedroom apartment in Logan Square, I felt the fatigue settle in my bones. I kicked off my sneakers, tossed my bag on the couch, and went straight for the fridge. Leftover pasta from 2 nights ago, still good enough. I scooped some onto a plate, tossed it in the microwave, and let my mind wander while the timer counted down. I wasn't expecting anything unusual that night. No emergencies, no surprises. And then, just as I was about to sit down with my food, I heard a noise at the front door. At first, I thought it was Mr. Rodriguez, my upstairs neighbor, who had a habit of dropping things at all hours. But then I heard it again. A key. In the lock. My spine stiffened, my body frozen in place. The only other person who had a key to my apartment was my landlord, and there was no reason for him to be here unannounced. The door handle twisted. The lock clicked, and then it swung open. There, standing in the doorway, was my father, Martin Keller, a man who, at one point in my life, had been my hero. Now, he was just a shadow of someone I used to love. He was wearing his old Chicago Cubs jacket, the same one I used to steal when I was a teenager. His hair had gone grayer since the last time I saw him, and his face was thinner, almost gaunt. But his eyes, that same unpredictable anger I had grown up with, was still there. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. I hadn't seen my father in over a year, and I sure as HLL hadn't given him a key to my place. I slowly put my fork down. "Dad." He stepped inside and kicked the door shut behind him. His hands were shoved into the pockets of his jacket, but there was a tension in his shoulders that made my gut scream danger. "Where is it?" he asked, his voice low. I frowned. "Where's what?" "You know damn well what I'm talking about, Noah. The money. I know you got it. The inheritance." I suddenly felt sick. 3 weeks ago, my grandfather, Walter Keller, had passed away. He was 92, a hard ass until his last breath. He had never been the warm, storytelling grandpa, but he had been fair. And before he died, he made one final decision that changed everything. He left the majority of his wealth to me. Not my father. Me. The will had been clear. Grandpa knew who my father was. A man who had spent his entire life gambling away every dollar he touched, drinking himself into oblivion, making promises he never intended to keep. And so, instead of leaving him a single dime, he left it to me. My father had lost his mind over it. "You think you're real special, huh?" Dad sneered, stepping further into the room. "You think you deserve that money more than me?" I forced myself to stay calm, even though my heart was hammering in my chest. "I didn't take anything from you, Dad. That was Grandpa's decision." "Bullshit," he spat. "You think I don't know how you manipulated him? You poisoned him against me." I exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the table. "I didn't have to, Dad. You did that all on your own." For a moment, he just stared at me, his hands twitching at his sides. "You're gonna give me that money," he said finally, his voice tight with barely contained rage. "All of it." I let out a dry, humorless laugh. "You're out of your damn mind." His face darkened. "I'm not playing around, Noah." I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. My hands were shaking, but I clenched them into fists. "And what if I say no?" His lip curled. "Then I take it. By force." There it was. The line he had never crossed before. My father had never hit me, not once. But I had spent my entire childhood flinching, bracing myself, waiting. And now here we were. I took a slow, steady breath and met his gaze. "Do you really want to do this?" Something flickered in his expression, hesitation, maybe. But then it was gone, buried under years of resentment and desperation. "You wouldn't call the cops on your own father," he scoffed. And then he turned, and he saw the man standing in the hallway. Lucas Monroe, my grandfather's former lawyer. More importantly, a former Marine. The kind of guy who didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a presence that said, "I've seen worse than you," and I didn't flinch. And he was armed. Not in a threatening way. The gun was just there, resting in a holster on his hip, like an unspoken warning. Lucas crossed his arms. "Martin, I suggest you rethink your next move." Dad went rigid. His eyes darted from me to Lucas, his breathing shallow. He was outnumbered, outmatched. He knew it. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Then, without another word, he turned back to me. "You think this is over?" he said, his voice quiet but venomous. "You think you won?" I exhaled, exhaustion pressing down on me like a weight. "Go home, Dad." For a second, I thought he might lunge at me. But then he let out a sharp breath, turned on his heel, and yanked the door open. Before stepping out, he glanced at me one last time. His face was twisted with something. Anger, hatred, maybe even regret. And then he was gone. I stood there, listening to his footsteps disappear down the hallway. My hands were still shaking. Lucas watched me carefully. "You okay?" I swallowed, forcing a nod. "Yeah, just." I never thought he'd actually do it. Lucas sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Desperate men do stupid things. I looked at him. "You think he'll come back?" Lucas didn't answer right away. But when he did, his voice was firm. "If he does, we'll be ready." That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the man who was supposed to be my father. The man who had once been my hero. And the man who had chosen his own failures over his son. I had always known my father was broken. I just never thought he'd try to break me too. I took a deep breath, but it didn't do much to steady me. My hands were still shaking, my chest tight with something between rage and exhaustion. Lucas watched me for a long moment before stepping toward the door, checking the locks. He pressed his palm against the wood, as if testing its strength, before looking back at me. "You need to change the locks first thing tomorrow. If he had one key, he might have another." I swallowed hard, nodding. Lucas glanced at me again, his expression unreadable. "You sure you're okay?" I let out a slow breath. "I don't know." That was the most honest answer I could give. It wasn't just about what had happened tonight. It was everything. My father breaking in, the inheritance, the years of buried resentment finally spilling over into something real and dangerous. I had spent most of my life pretending he didn't have that kind of power over me anymore, that I had moved on. But he had found a way to remind me just how wrong I was. Lucas studied me for another second, then sighed. "Listen, I don't want to tell you what to do, but you should consider filing a police report." I flinched. "I don't want to do that." "I know," Lucas said, his voice gentler now. "But he broke into your home, Noah. That's not nothing. And if he comes back, he won't." I said it too quickly, too forcefully. Lucas just raised an eyebrow. "You really believe that?" I didn't answer. Because the truth was, I didn't know. My father wasn't the type to let things go. If he wanted something, needed something, he would find a way to take it. I had seen him do it 1,000 times before. With my mother's savings, with borrowed money from friends he never intended to pay back, with anything that wasn't nailed down. And now, he wanted the inheritance. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes, exhaling slowly. "I just need time to think." Lucas nodded, stepping away from the door. "All right. But if he shows up again, don't hesitate. Call the cops. Call me. Just don't try to handle it alone." I gave him a small, tired nod. "Thanks, Lucas." He patted my shoulder once before heading for the door. Before he left, he looked over his shoulder. "Get some rest, kid. You're gonna need it." Then he was gone. And I was alone. I barely slept that night. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the window made my pulse jump. My body was still stuck in fight or flight mode, expecting my father to come back, expecting another confrontation. At some point, exhaustion won out, and I drifted off into a restless, dreamless sleep. When I woke up the next morning, my first instinct was to check the locks. They were still in place. No signs of forced entry. No signs of him. I tried to shake off the unease as I got ready for the day. I had work in a few hours, and I needed to focus. But as I pulled on my scrubs and grabbed my keys, my stomach clenched with dread. Because I knew my father. And this wasn't over. I stopped at a locksmith before heading to work. The guy behind the counter, some old-timer with a thick Chicago accent, didn't ask too many questions. He just nodded when I told him I needed my locks changed ASAP and got to work. As I stood outside my apartment, waiting for him to finish, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, my stomach tightening when I saw the caller ID. "Mom." I hesitated before answering. "Hey, Mom." "Noah," she said, her voice already filled with concern. "What happened?" I closed my eyes. "Did he call you?" "He showed up at my house at 4 in the morning, she said sharply, banging on the door, screaming about how you stole from him. I had to threaten to call the police before he left. I let out a shaky breath. I could picture it perfectly. My father, standing on my mom's porch, slurring his words, fists clenched, demanding answers. "He's losing it," she continued. "You need to be careful." "I know. You need to get a restraining order, Noah." I pinched the bridge of my nose, the pressure in my skull building. "Mom, it's not that simple." "Yes, it is," she snapped. "He's dangerous, Noah. You don't owe him anything. He made his choices." "I know," I interrupted, rubbing my temple. "I know, Mom. But he's still my father." There was a long silence on the other end. Then, quietly, she said, "That doesn't mean he won't hurt you." That hit me harder than I expected. "Just promise me you'll do something," she said, her voice softer now. "Talk to a lawyer. Get security cameras. Just don't ignore this." I swallowed hard. "I won't." Another pause. Then she sighed. "I love you, Noah." "I love you too, Mom." We hung up, and I stared at my phone for a long time. The locksmith finished a few minutes later, handing me the new set of keys. "Should be good now," he said. This locks a HLL of a lot more secure than the last one. Thanks, I muttered, slipping the keys into my pocket. As I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, I took a deep breath and tried to shake off the heaviness pressing down on my chest. But I couldn't, because I knew, deep down, that my father wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Work was a welcome distraction. I threw myself into my shifts, focusing on my patients, letting the chaos of the hospital drown out everything else. But even when I wasn't thinking about my father, the anxiety lingered just beneath the surface. By the time I clocked out that night, I was exhausted. But the thought of going home, of being alone in my apartment, made my stomach twist. So I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I called my best friend, Leo Carter. Leo and I had known each other since college. He was the kind of guy who could make a funeral feel like a comedy show, always cracking jokes at the worst possible moments. But he also had my back, no matter what. When he picked up, his voice was groggy. Dude, it's almost midnight. Why are you calling me? I hesitated. Can I crash at your place? Leo was silent for a second. Then, more awake now, he asked, Noah, what's going on? I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. It's my dad. I stopped, unsure how to even explain it. He broke into my apartment last night. Said he was going to take my inheritance by force. Leo swore under his breath. Jesus, man. Yeah. You call the cops? Not yet. You need to. I swallowed hard. I know. Leo was quiet for a beat. Then, he said, yeah, man. Come over. I'll leave the door unlocked. Thanks, Leo. Of course, he said. But Noah? Yeah. You know he's not just going to let this go, right? I closed my eyes. Yeah, I muttered. I know. And that was the problem. Because no matter what I did, no matter how many locks I changed, I knew my father wasn't finished with me yet. Not even close. I barely slept at Leo's that night. Even though I felt safer there, my mind wouldn't shut off. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father standing in my apartment, his voice low and threatening. By the time morning rolled around, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to let him walk all over me. Not this time. The first thing I did was contact Lucas. When he picked up, his voice was already sharp. Noah, did something happen? Not yet, I said, grabbing my jacket. But I need to take action before it does. Lucas didn't hesitate. Come to my office. An hour later, I sat in a sleek, intimidating-looking law office in downtown Chicago, gripping a cup of terrible coffee while Lucas explained my options. A restraining order is a good start, he said. But given that he broke into your home and made a threat, you could also press charges. I swallowed hard. I don't want to send my father to jail. Lucas studied me. You might not have a choice, Noah. He's unstable. And let me be clear, he will try again. I looked down at my coffee, my stomach twisting. Lucas leaned forward. Then there's another option, he said. Something a little more strategic. I raised an eyebrow. Strategic how? Lucas smirked. Ever hear of a conservatorship? I had never thought about taking legal control over my father's life. But as Lucas explained the details, I realized something. My father had spent his entire life taking from other people. Lying, manipulating, scamming. He had never been held accountable. Until now. A conservatorship, Lucas explained, would allow me to take control of his finances, including his debts. If I could prove that he was a financial danger to himself, which, let's be honest, wasn't difficult, I could petition the court to place him under legal guardianship. In short, my father, who had spent years using other people for money, would no longer be able to touch a single dollar without my approval. It wasn't just revenge. It was justice. I didn't have to wait long for my father to come crawling back. It was barely 3 days later when I got the call. Noah. My father's voice was frantic, slurring slightly. Listen, kid. I need your help. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my voice even. Oh, they froze my accounts, Noah. His voice was rising, panic creeping in. I went to the bank today, and they told me I couldn't take out any money. What the HLL is going on? I smirked, though he couldn't see it. Sounds like a real problem, Dad. He stopped short, realization hitting him like a truck. No. You did this, didn't you? I let the silence stretch before answering. I told you to leave me alone. You didn't listen. His breathing was ragged. You had no right. I had every right. I cut in. You broke into my home, threatened me, and tried to take what wasn't yours. Now, you don't get to touch your own money unless I say so. The line went dead silent. Then, low and venomous, he said, you think you won? I exhaled slowly. No, Dad. I think you lost. And then I hung up. Lucas had warned me that my father would fight the conservatorship. And he tried. Oh, he tried. He hired a lawyer, or, at least, tried to. Turns out, it's hard to afford legal help when you can't access your own money. He showed up at court, ranting about how I was stealing from him. But the judge took one look at his history, his gambling debts, his financial recklessness, his documented threats against me, and shut him down fast. The ruling was final. I had full control. My father? He was furious. But there was nothing he could do. No more gambling. No more conning people out of money. No more threats. The man who had spent his entire life trying to control others had lost control of himself. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. From him. I debated throwing it out. But in the end, curiosity won. The letter was short. A single sentence, scrawled in my father's messy handwriting. You'll regret this. I read it twice. Then, calmly, I folded it, tossed it in the trash, and moved on with my life. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't the one with regrets. He was. And that was the best revenge of all.